Hi, and welcome to my studio. This is a demonstration on painting my friend Verdi, painting his head from life in one shot, in 1 hour. Um, Verdi and I went to high school together, and we've known each other for a while now. We play music together, and I asked him to please pose for me one night, one evening. Wow, one of our favorite albums plays. One album from this rock band called the Mars Volta. So, needless to say, it was a fun night. I'm sorry for the movement there of the camera. Um, but I am here deciding to add another color that I didn't put at first, just because I thought that it will get his complexion closer to what it is that I am seeing. So for this demonstration, I am using oil colors on wood, on a piece of wood that I prepare. Maybe in later videos I will um, make on how it is that I prepare these boards, but it is with gesso. Um, the colors that I'm using are titanium white, yellow ochre, vermilion red, cobalt blue, ivory black, and then I added the alizarin crimson. At first, I mixed the color for my shadow with the black, vermilion, alizarin crimson, and a little bit of blue to get the overall shape of the head. And now, with all the other colors except for black, I am getting the general hue or the general color and the general tone for his light to create that yin and yang as you see it on the palette and as you are seeing it on the canvas. Now I am going to be looking for the eye socket, because the very first things that I am looking for are the relationship of the big shape or the overall shape of the skull versus the eye sockets and the ridge of the nose. So with the color value of the shadow, I am placing more or less where I believe that eye socket goes, again in relationship to the big shape that I just um, painted. Here I'm looking for where the dark of his hair goes. And I am starting with the shadows because that's where the moment of less light goes. So I know what value to start with. What is the darkest value or color that I have on my palette? Well, it's closer to black. I mean, black and vermilion with cobalt and a little bit of alizarin crimson gives me a very dark tone close to the value of black. So I can start drawing off of that, so I can start getting my contrast right away correctly on the canvas. Now I am placing one of my lightest lights, my values that are closest to white. um, I'm looking that on him. I am paying attention to what the color is. I'm trying to mix that color, but more importantly, I am paying attention to the contrast and to the value. How light or dark does it go? That's really what's going to make things look realistic in the end of the day, more than the color itself. You will realize that depending on the time of day, even though this is at night and I am using lamps, fluorescent light bulbs. I'm sorry. Um, so it's very cool. So the highlights are going to be very close to the titanium white in a way, and then my shadows in turn are going to be pretty warm. As you can see, I am adding more and more of the vermilion and ochre in order to get some of that contrast. And I think that that's the trick with these Alla Prima portraits. or paintings that we do, we want to look for something that has a stark contrast, so it's easier for us to find those two extremes right away. So then we can start controlling or calibrating, I should say, our values, which is how dark or light something goes. Notice how I am using pretty big brushes, and that is thanks to the fact that this painting is small too, right? Which is something that I hope you guys pick up on, and also emulate, because I think that the small canvas allows you to see the whole thing at one glance, and also to realize that with big brushes you can do so much, as you see here with this number 12 flat brush that I have. And as you can see, through the reach of that shadow edge, or through the shape of the shadow, I am constructing his face. That color value against the color value that I found for his general light, and that's really what's giving me that sense of a head and a plane turning into space. What I was referring to earlier was about the changing of light and the changing of color. Um, was that when you're painting from life and from natural light, uh, because the clouds passing by changes the color of your subject, and they are not there for you to chase it, but they are there for you to make choices. And you have it there as different options, and it is up to you, the artist, to um, decide whether you like it the way it looks when it's cloudy, or the way you like it the way that it looks when is sunny. So don't think that you need to be chasing these changes of light necessarily, but rather take it as different options that you have. And also realize, if you start looking at paintings in history, um, the color of the skin tends to be a very generic one usually. What's really important and what's really crucial throughout every painting, or every great painting in history in that realistic sense, um, or in the realistic category, I should say, is that they are all based on tone. They're all based on value first, rather than color. Color became a priority after the Impressionist painters. Before that, it was all based on a generic skin tone, uh, but heavily based on value, how light or dark a color is. Now I am looking for the side of his mouth and remembering um, the structure and the architecture that I mentioned on my last video, right? That normally the corners of the mouth usually line up with um, the middle of the pupil um, of the portrait of the human head. Um, but this is a more of a three-quarter point of view, so we have to obviously keep that in mind. The ear usually lines uh, between the top of the eyebrows and the bottom of the nose. So I am taking these canons of proportion, or this architecture. I'm taking that in consideration, and I keep it in the back of my mind. But obviously, I'm overimposing all of this knowledge on what's in front of my eyes, right? Um, I am putting light and the abstract shapes that are in front of me as my main priority. Okay, I never put any any thought on drawing a nose or an eye or an ear. I am thinking abstractly as much as possible. I am squinting down at my model and I am editing. How am I editing? I am compressing down the values, grouping them together, so to speak. So that way I am able to, as you can see, pretty quickly get a sense of the whole head um, without falling into unnecessary details, right? Um, so I am paying attention to the contour of the head versus uh, that main shadow shape that you see here blocked in. Notice something that at this stage, the top of the head, right, with including the eye sockets, from the eye sockets up, the head really looks like the skull if you think about it, right? So with the exception of the bridge of the nose and our lips and our cheeks, everything else is basically the skull. The cheekbones, you can still see them. The eye sockets, we can still see them. And the cranium, of course, we can still see it. So it is very important that you take a moment and study the shapes that make up the skull, um, because it will make this the stage of the process a lot easier for you. So yeah, familiarize yourself with the skull, and also the importance of grouping your values together, right? Squinting down at the model and realizing, okay, the strongest moments of lights are here on the right hand side of the painting. Then the middle seems to have a warmer tonality, which seems to be the base color for his skin, right? And then the shadow, which is a very dark moment. So having those three main distinctions will create that sense of plane, that sense of structure, and it will allow you in a very simple and flexible way to draw comfortably. Uh, with more care now, the features and the shapes that make up the portrait of my friend here. When I am softening an edge, as you saw me do, I try to apply uh, less pressure on one side of the brush than the other. Meaning, if I have the light color, like in this case, right, and I'm trying to soften that light color against the dark color of the hair, I try to have more pressure on the light side and less on the dark side in order for the brush to soften that edge. If your strokes are catching glare, like you see mine do sometimes, um, I just basically change the direction of my strokes in order for until they don't catch that glare, basically. Okay. And here with a clean brush and linseed oil, I am cleaning the excess paint so I can go back to the white of the canvas. I don't do it with turpentine because turpentine will make it, it will leave um, a residue of paint in it, but with the linseed oil, it cleans it off pretty well. So in a way, you can say I'm using that as an eraser, okay? Um, but I usually don't erase things. Usually, I paint the background color into it to correct that. But because I am deciding here not to paint the background and just use the white of the panel, I was doing that little trick with a clean bristle brush and linseed oil. Now, with a little bit more care, I'm going into specificity, right? And where do I start? Again, I start on that Van Dyke Z that I mentioned in my last video, or on the eye sockets or eyebrows, to the bridge of the nose, to the base of the nose. That is the anchor for my portraits. Okay, I base all the proportions off that center. So that's basically where I also start becoming specific. Always start at the borders, at the silhouette of your shadow shapes. Don't go into the shadow. Stay on the silhouettes of the shadow first, and then go to the inside, and then check the outer borders of that silhouette again. A back and forth in between those two things. With this Alla Prima, or one shot in one sitting kind of paintings, the key is maintaining your values under control. You don't want to be fooling around and thinking, well, I'll paint this and I'll get to it later. You gotta attack it right away. My thought process is, whatever I'm putting the brush down, I am trying to finish that area and letting it be. So I am thinking a lot of Joaquin Sorolla, which is one of my favorite heroes painters. Um, I've always felt that he was reacting to the light much of how I am attempting to do. Um, but he was very unapologetic of his strokes, whereas I feel Sargent, I've always cared so much about how his strokes looks, so I feel it too self-conscious in my taste, personal taste, obviously. And that's, I guess, why I've always preferred Sorolla, because he's very unapologetic about how he's putting the pain down and how he's seeing the world. I'm also focusing on the light area first, also because that's going to be my focal point. Um, so I want that area to work first, uh, more than the shadow, because a lot of the times I get some of the students asking me, why am I not putting more information in the shadow? And the reason for that is because I want to save as much value variation for my lights rather than in my shadows, because it is within the lights that the form really lies. Okay, that's just a principle. And in the shadows, shadows are just atmosphere, light is form. So that's the reason why I'm deciding to focus on the light area first, and manipulate the border of my shadow um, after, as a reaction to that light. So what you're seeing me do here is manipulating how soft or sharp the edges of that shadow are, in order to um, give the impression of a turn, or of a sharp cut. going for some deeper value to help me turn the form into that eye. He's looking down, so what I'm painting is his the light on his eyelid, um, and he's also wearing glasses. There's going to be a moment there where you will be able to see him and have an idea of what it is that I am looking at. I think also the trick is to having a clear idea and a clear palette and clear brushes of your shadows, your halftones, and your lights. So you can use those mixtures and those brushes and those separations in your palette um, to simply draw and follow the abstract shapes uh, that constitute the light on him. So that way you're not uh, mixing and focusing every stroke that you make on what color or value it is. So you already have them on your brush, you already have them on your palette, and then simply just follow the shapes. But follow the shapes, remember what I've said before, with a sense of straight line. You don't want to start making curves necessarily. You want to uh, look for angles, right? That's the reason why I was using a lot of those flat brushes at the beginning, right? So then I could have a sense of straightness to the breaks of my form, so to get a better sense of plane shifts. Usually, a sitter that is wearing glasses makes your job a little bit easier because the leg of the glass, right, allows you to compare the direction of the side of the head versus the frontal side of the face, right, as shown in this diagram. Softening the edge allows the form to keep turning and not just stop. So make sure that your edges are always soft enough. Remember, it's easier to sharpen an edge than to have to soften it. So always try to keep your edges soft and work from a mid-range to your extremes as you see me do. My shadows are not as dark as they need to be because I am reserving that very, very dark moment, that very, very black moment for accents like I am looking for right now. And the same goes for your lights. Notice that in the mid section where the nose goes, I haven't put my strongest lights just yet because again I'm starting from a mid range and working my way out into my extremes. Cleaning or erasing the border with a clean brush and linseed oil. Try not to leave the linseed oil dripping like it is right now because we don't want excess oil or unnecessary layers of fat or oil um, floating on our surface. Okay, it's just bad for the healthiness of and the long-term health of the painting. Looking for that line in between the lips. That's how I start working on the mouth by locating the corners, which again line up with on a vertical axis to our pupil or the middle of our eyes. And once I find that location, I look for the middle line or the line between the lips. That's how I start breaking down the mouth. Also, the angles of a bearded man like Verdi also help um, for locating the angles of the jaw um, or the plane of the mouth, and so I will definitely recommend that as well for you guys to paint at first a bearded man rather than a soft woman or a soft young lady, just because those uh, planes are harder to see and perceive with a model like that. Notice how I'm never using just a straight black or just a very dark tone that is very close to black. I mean, probably here in the video you cannot see the nuance of the color in the shadow. It looks like black, but it isn't. As you see me mixing some vermilion or alizarin crimson, um, the color is never just pure black. Remember, that's reserved for those very dark moments, those dark accents. Okay. And I'm jumping around from the ear to the mouth to the border of my shadow to manipulate my edge. So I am not staying focused on just one area. I am staying focused on the whole head, on the whole painting. That's the only way to maintain a sense of solidity throughout the whole thing. In a minute, you guys will see the setup and my friend Verdi posing and a little bit more of the studio. Again, working on my contour with a clear or clean brush and linseed oil. It's a little bit of a back and forth sometimes, but that's okay, that's normal. Because you're trying to work out the information inside his face against the contour, the outer contour that I am trying to manipulate right now. So every time that I'm putting some information, um, the other information around is being affected. So I need to be working back and forth in between the two. As you notice, the further the painting goes, the slower I become, the more I slow down, because the more I am trying to become specific, and therefore you want to be attentive to every angle and it's how it affects the big shape. For example, before I put something down, I am looking at Verdi and I am asking myself, is this decision, is this angle, is this value that I'm putting down, is it going to get me closer to his likeness or to the likeness of the shape in particular that I'm painting, or is it not? So I try to visualize that before I put it down and then I test it. Bringing a little bit more light into the shadow, but never breaking apart the big shadow group that I have created in my blocking stage. Carefully visualizing where the glasses go and I put it down. I am trying my best not to come back and fix it. I am trying to put it down and letting it be as if it was a watercolor or an ink wash. That's usually I find a very, very good practice. So if you, I encourage you to try at least some drawings with ink wash and water. Maybe I'll do a video on that soon. And as you can see, throughout my contour and throughout the contour of my shadow edge, I am keeping those edges as angular as I can, obviously without breaking the sense of reality. But that is again to reinforce the sense of plane throughout the face. And the bigger the brush, the broader your sense of design and shape is going to be. So I encourage you guys to use bigger brushes, of course. And you see with that stroke, you see the importance of reserving those very, very dark moments for later. Because by putting those dark accents, I am able to pull the form that I have been working on all this time. Sorry about that. Camera refocusing. Reinforcing the edge of my shadow, but it has a very, very soft edge, so it's almost imperceptible, but it is there. So usually when that happens, it means that the values are very, very close to each other. They do not have that much contrast, but there might be a shift in color. Okay, so the edges are soft, but even if it's soft, make sure that you make an effort to make that edge of the shadow specific but soft. That's the trick and that's the challenge, right? Soft but specific. I will be mentioning that in the next videos to come. What you see me doing here is simply softening the edge, breaking down the rigidity of the juxtaposition of those two colors. And even though my palette looks a little bit messy, uh, try to see how I am keeping an order between, again, my lights, my halftones, and my shadows. And I'm trying my best not to mix one from the other. I am trying to keep those three main distinctions separate. Uh, so that way my mixtures are not dirty. Bringing a little bit more opacity or more impasto to my lights in order for the actual light in the room to catch some of that texture on the canvas, to bring some more sense of three-dimensionality and weight to the painting. Density is probably the word I'm looking for. With these Alla Prima studies, with these Alla Prima paintings, the point is not to paint every feature, but rather the big impression of light over the whole head. Attempting to make some of that jawline a little bit darker, and as you can see, I'm trying to pull the darker value into the lighter value, so I am allowing the brush to follow that same direction. I guess that's what they mean when they say allow your brush strokes or your strokes to follow the form. Um, I understand it better when I say um, I am allowing my strokes to follow the light or the fall of light. For the last 10 minutes of the painting, I felt like I needed to work a little bit more on the lips, so I felt the palette was a little bit too chaotic, and I was running a little bit of running out of space. So I cleaned it up and restarted again my mixtures. Um, I usually use a bigger palette that I hold in my hand, but for the sake of making these tutorial videos, I'm using a smaller one and having it right here next to the painting so you guys can see what exactly it is that I'm mixing. Notice how I am relating a vertical line uh, from his eye into the corner of his mouth just to know exactly where it is that it falls. I had it a little bit too much to the right, so I had to move it a bit into the center line or onto the left. Um, so I threw that vertical line on the model too as an imaginary line. Um, I recommend you guys using a plumb line or a string with a weight, like a key at the end of it, so then you can use vertical axes and relate them on top of the model just to see how these axes are meeting one another throughout the face. The reason why I always tend to leave the mouth for last is because it's a small shape, tends to be moving, because the model tends to be talking to you at first. And usually at the end of the session is when they start getting a little bit more quiet, so that's when I tend to attack the mouth Also, one of the main reasons why I tend to leave it at the end is because between the base of the nose and the chin, right, there is that measurement that repeats itself from the base of the nose to the middle of the eyebrows, and from the middle of the eyebrows to um, the hairline, as shown in this diagram here. But what is interesting to note is that the bottom of the bottom lip usually falls in the middle of that third, which is between the base of the nose and the chin. So I say that only for you guys to have it as a reference. It's not a rule. Edges. Painting is all about edges. John Singer Sargent, one of my favorite painters, technically speaking, used to say that. And I mentioned that right now because working on the bottom lip, I realized that there is a very, very strong, um, sharp edge on the bottom, and then a very soft edge on the left as it moves. The light of the bottom lip, as it moves into the shadow, becomes really, really soft. And so the variation of edges from sharp to soft is paramount for the sense of form in a painting. Moving a bit quicker here because I know that my session is about to be over, as we agreed to stop the exact same moment as the uh, album that we're listening to ends. So um, I'm looking now for those very high moments of light on the nose and on the lip so I can conclude this study. I apologize as there has been some glare on the painting, especially on the eyes and left side of the shadow. So I apologize for that. Again, this was at night using fluorescent light bulbs, which I'm usually not that used to. So I usually paint with a natural light. I'm looking for a lighter value in between the shadow and the light of the neck, so it doesn't look too cut out, the design, and gives me a sense of a better sense of form. The same here with the ear, looking for the general light planes. So I have a shadow, a halftone, and then now a light. Again, that's usually the basic um, value planes that I am looking for. Softening that highlight that I put to create a light plane on the bottom lip first. Now that halftone plane and the halftone plane going into the shadow. And then on top of that later on, I will have the highlighter on the bottom lip. The philtrum going through the middle line that crosses the bridge of the nose and the middle of the forehead. And I guess I'm going to finish this painting with the slight or the small light on the glasses and the bottom lip too. I think that will be my last stroke. I hope you guys enjoyed this and I hope it is helpful. I encourage you guys to do one as well. Thank you.